Okay, so on to the Planning Enabling Act. As you're aware from your training, the Enabling Act does authorize master planning. It includes all the content that needs to be in a master plan, the minimum contents, as well as the process and preparation and adoption. So there's a minimum framework for what needs to be in a master plan. Obviously, many communities, especially those with a lot going on, there's a lot more to it and a lot of extra steps that you can include, especially for public input.
I was asked earlier today, is it legally required to have such a plan?
A master plan is legally required in order to establish zoning for your community.
Okay.
So if you want to regulate by zoning, it needs to be, the master plan needs to be the basis for it.
Thank
But
you.
it in itself has no judiciary or statutory.
Yes, the master plan is a guiding document.
Right.
So it's adopted by resolution, not ordinance. It's not law. But it's really based on, it helps you to make your decisions for establishing ordinances, zoning, public expenditure, and so on. But the master plan document itself is not law. It's a guiding document.
Thanks.
And as you know, then to the Planning Enabling Act enables the creation of the Planning Commission, discusses the membership duties and requirements of the Planning Commission. Okay, so what is a master plan? Again, you can probably teach this for me at this point, but the master plan is a planning commission spearheaded effort to chart the city's future. When we do master planning, we try to think out 20 years. So we want to think well outside of the time frame of your capital improvements program or really even well past the 5-year update. So a master plan is required to be updated or reviewed every 5 years. So the 5-year requirement is that you look at it, you have a discussion, and that discussion is included on the meeting minutes of official planning commission. That's the only requirement that you need to fulfill. Actually updating the master plan, that's going to be based on your discretion. A master plan should be updated when it no longer reflects the perspective of the community, present day conditions, and it no longer serves as a good guiding document. So, sometimes we update master plans that are 10, 15 years old, and they are by far out of date in terms with the reality of today's issues and perspectives. Some master plans, even though within a 5-year time period, can be updated because a lot can happen within a 5-year time period in a growing community or community that has a lot going on.
Excuse me, Cindy, do we update or do we review every 5 years?
We pretty much review all the time. We're constantly reviewing.
The master plan.
Yes.
And we'll touch on this later. One of the master planning best practices is to have an annual review of your task list. So it's almost like a living document. So even just having that discussion on an annual basis is a review. So as long as it's reflected on the minutes and then you're working with it, that meets the spirit and intent of the Planning Enabling Act. So what's in a master plan? As you know, community profile, inventory, and needs assessment. So you look at housing, you look at employment, you look at infrastructure, land use, and you create a needs assessment. And you want to first have that base understanding of what's in your community so that you can plan for it appropriately. There's an inventory of roads and infrastructure. Then most importantly, the city's vision statement, goals, and principles. So the vision statement could be one overall arching statement concerning your goals and values. The goals are typically, you would have one probably for each chapter or for each subject area. So you could have a housing goal, an economic development goal, environmental protection goal. So those are more overarching statements to each individual chapter or major topic area. And then you would have principles, which are really guiding policies that you would consider in decision making, and then actions, which are things that you're actually going to accomplish. The master plan is also an incredible opportunity for civic engagement, to be able to get the folks into the room, to be able to get them to participate in online surveys or other events. It's probably one of the best opportunities for citizens to be involved in what happens in the community and really charting the course of the city's future. So we'll talk a lot about public input later. And I suggest if you go through a public master planning process, you really beef up that public involvement process. because it ultimately is a plan of the citizens. You are you're spearheading the effort, but it's based on citizen input and perspectives, as well as your technical knowledge and the knowledge of any consultants that might help you. A future land use plan, in most communities, the future land use plan is probably the most important and sometimes really the only part of the master plan that is looked at on a frequent basis. So a future land use plan would help to guide rezoning decisions and so on. And then, as I mentioned before, implementation strategy. The plan should really be a living document, something that has priorities for your actions, a work plan, responsible parties. So the implementation strategy is very important. And I'll show you some examples of that later on. And as we said before, the last point here is that the master plan guides zoning, land use decisions, and even capital improvements. So does the city have a 6-year capital improvement plan, or is it?
I think it's a 5.
Okay, so 5-year. So the master plan is not going to necessarily list capital improvements, as detailed as a capital improvement plan that the city administration will work on an annual basis. But the master plan would support those projects. So you may generally talk about infrastructure or parks or other types of, or sidewalks and connectivity and pathways. Those types of things would be generally mentioned in a master plan. You could even talk about projects that you want to include in the capital improvements plan, but you wouldn't have a budget in the master plan necessarily, and you wouldn't say you have the specific details of those projects. Those would be worked out annually during your capital improvement process, or just as needed. So the master plan still needs to be considered a long-term document and a guide. It's not necessarily the specific implementation practices that you carry out every month or every year. Okay, the next several slides are just general best practices. And these are some things that you can incorporate into a planning process. As you're aware, in most master plans that you see typically have an existing land use map. A lot of times that existing land use map becomes obsolete. It could become obsolete tomorrow. Land uses change. Every month you get new applications in, properties convert to commercial, residential developments go into vacant property. So a existing land use map is kind of a snapshot in time, which is perfectly okay. Most master plans have an existing land use map. What I suggest is a character and area analysis. So a character area analysis goes a bit further than existing land use map. As the example up here shows a 1 square mile, that's the village of Fruitport there. What we did in that exercise is break out the village into various character areas. So even between a commercial area, so down the main corridor there on 3rd Avenue, north to south, an existing land use map would probably have that as vacant land or commercial. We actually broke that out into 3 distinct areas, kind of a northern gateway, a transitional area, which is kind of a mix between like live work units, commercial and residential, and then the downtown central business area. So with a character analysis, we go a little bit deeper into what's on the ground and make distinctions between certain areas of the jurisdiction. Even with residential, you may have different types of traditional residential, denser mixed use residential or rural residential. So it goes a bit deeper into the land use analysis. So you really know what's on the ground, and then you even look at the elements of each area. So you're looking at the scale of developments within those areas. So it could be, larger warehouse type buildings or smaller village type buildings, blocks and lots. So the size of lots or the length of blocks. Some of the blocks could be more suburban in nature. Some could be urban in nature. So it's important to make those distinctions of certain residential areas. Also streets, sidewalks, pathways, and parking. So how you get around by car or by foot. It's important to understand what you have on the ground in each one of those areas. And then uses and building type. Uses is very important to understand. It's going to relate to zoning. It's going to relate to future land use planning. So it's important to understand the uses there and the types of buildings. So it's important to understand the area, and what this does then is create a justification for future land use categories. And what it also does is it helps you to identify what you want to preserve. So there might be certain areas or neighborhoods that you like the aesthetic, you like the layout, it's a well-established neighborhood, it should be preserved. There might be areas that are somewhat underbuilt or that don't have the best type of development. Those are areas that you could enhance. And then the areas for complete redevelopment could be areas to transform. So understanding the character of the area and what's on the ground will help you to determine what to preserve, enhance, and transform. And that is all part of your master planning process. And then just to give an example here, as I said, the character area map is here for the village of Fruitport. And then each one of the small little slides there that you cannot read, those are descriptions of each one of the distinct character areas. So, in this case, there's a waterfront commercial, central business area, traditional urban development. So each one of those areas would be defined and described. Any questions on the character area analysis?
So the character area isn't necessarily like a zone.
No,
Okay.
not at all. And that's a really good point, because zoning is what can happen now. Zoning is not necessarily what's there now. So when we look at the character analysis and look at these natural boundaries between areas, that's going to help you to determine your future land use planning, those classifications, and then that is going to influence your zoning map.
Okay.
So the zoning map is not always going to be the same as the future land use map or the character area map or an existing land use map. Over the long term, those three maps will start to look more closer and closer, but the future land use map is not always going to look like the zoning map. And so over time, zoning will eventually start to look like what you plan for.
Okay. Thank you.
But if you just look at them without really giving it much detail in terms of your review, they do look similar. Their designations, that they have their title, they're described. So if you're not aware of what's in the plan, someone could be certainly mixed up between what each one of the maps is meant to do, but they all relate. Okay, public participation for the next best practice. This is what I think is probably the most important part of your process, is to get that public input, to get the consensus and the buy-in of your community. You could adopt a plan, you could go through the bare bones minimum type of public involvement, public hearing, and adopt the plan you think is best based on your experience, the 5 to 7 of you. But it may not reflect the perspective of the community. You want to be able to hear from them. You want to add your expertise, your technical knowledge, but it should be based on the public input. So public involvement is essential for buy-in, and it will help, especially when you pass this on to the city council. If there's concern in the community that it's not reflecting their perspective, that could derail a project. It's happened before. We've seen it happen, and so it's always good to get public involvement early in the process for that buy-in. Identifying those key stakeholders is very important. So on the slide here, you would want to identify neighborhood leaders. You might have schools involved, even students, business association, the chamber, nonprofits, other types of community organizations, environmental groups, housing groups, then even developers or large landowners who are certainly stakeholders, because they are going to put a lot of skin in the game to develop property, and even neighboring jurisdictions. So whether you do another tri-community plan or you just do a city plan, in either case, you still would have involvement from neighboring jurisdictions. They are definitely stakeholders. You have a lot of issues of common concern, so you want them to be identified and involved. So identifying those stakeholders allows you to determine best how they're involved in your process, whether you're having roundtable discussions or interviews or just making sure that they have a seat at the table. It's important to think about who these groups are and how to get them involved. So in terms of the next two slides are concerning types of public participation. You have your traditional techniques, which is on this slide, and the next slide is going to be your more proactive methods for public involvement. So traditional, this is the bare bones, public notice, public hearing, a press release. You may post the plan online. You could even send out postcards. Postcards are pretty good. Those are effective, but those are pretty traditional. And I say here, if it met the minimum requirements, it met the minimum requirements, but was there really meaningful impact and meaningful input from the community? A lot of times, if you just implement the traditional techniques, you're probably not going to have a lot of involvement at the meetings. People probably won't know about it. They may not be something that really catches their eye, and the plan might not necessarily reflect what the community wants for the city. So you could do the minimum and get a plan done, implement it. It happens all the time, but is that really what you want? So there are ideas then for proactive techniques. So you could have an online community attitude survey. You could do interviews with individuals. You could do roundtable discusustions with those various stakeholder groups. You could even mix and match those groups, invite them all to a kind of a roundtable type session, mix them up between tables, and then you'll get some interesting conversations. You could have walking tours or even bus tours with the commission members and other participants. You could do design charrettes, to where those are like multi-day type sessions where you would have a designer sketching out the discussions of the evening, and then there'd be a feedback loop. So the next night, that designer would work on the sketches the next night, present them the next day at the meeting. So there's opportunity for design oriented public participation over multi-day events. With open houses too, you could have various public participation boards. So, a lot of times we use sticky notes or Post-its, or allow participants just to mark up a map. I think a lot of times when a participant can just touch and feel the map, or put something on it, or place their comment on it, they're becoming more involved in that process. And I think the input at that point is all the more valuable. So the graphics over to the side of the slide are people are basically voting with their dot on the first top right. What are the top 3 issues that are most important to them? And then the bottom image is basically a mobility map. So it's where road improvements are needed, where sidewalks and crosswalks are needed. And so each one of these boards at a public open house would be staffed by a planning commission member or consultant or volunteers. And they would work, and participants would work their way around the room and be involved at each one of those stations. And then they could, in this case, they were putting a red dot where they wanted to see a crosswalk, a green dot where a pathway improvement was necessary, or road improvement with a yellow dot. So it's a good way to get people involved, to actually have that interaction. At the same time, the person who's staffing that station is taking notes and is ensuring that they're understanding the reasoning why people are putting their dots on certain intersections. So it's important for that person to be able to take that input and then be able to report back to the subcommittee or the planning commission, whoever's leading the project. Again, the project website and social media these days, whether it's Facebook or Instagram, Twitter, social media, depending on the community, can really help get the word out and help get people involved in a process. It's a lot more prevalent now than it was 10 years ago. So it's something that we're adapting now with the new age of technology and social media. So it's definitely an opportunity. So then I asked them, was there meaningful input now? I'd be willing to say yes, probably a lot more meaningful input if you did more of the proactive techniques in a master planning process. So any questions on public involvement or what you might be able to do?
I mean, we'll maybe get into this later, but when you talk about sort of an aid to looking forward and what have you, general character of neighborhoods or whatever it is at that level, I think that's one thing. And I think conceivably that offers a guide or a framework or whatever. I kind of worry when you get down to having people put stickies on maps that say, I want a crosswalk here. And let's say that that gets a lot, that we've now crossed over into so where's my freaking crosswalk?
You set an expectation.
Yeah, you said, why did I bother doing all this if I'm not going to get my crosswalk or my trail or my, that list goes on till hell freezes over. And the nature of public, and I sound negative, and I don't mean to be negative, but the nature of public feedback that I've found, particularly in this community, is everybody's carrying their axe. And sometimes those are shared axes. A lot of times, everybody's got their own axe. And they're going to be working. I know, and these are smart people. Everybody moves here from someplace else. And I've said before, everybody moves here, and you can tell by the way they talk that they came from an environment where people had to pay attention to what they were saying because they work for them. Here, nobody's got to pay attention, but they still talk that way. I'm a good example, I think. In any case, I just worry that the people that will be most likely to give the feedback you're asking for are the people at the very forefront of whatever that agenda item is. And so, and that public feedback is going to be limited in the first place, so that if you've only got the, the flag carrier in the room working for the crosswalk or the trail or the who knows what, anything, that's going to get reflected in the plan, but it's not, and it may have at the time sounded like it was a general community feeling, but it really wasn't. We know how little public feedback you get if you do all that stuff 3 times over. It's you're asking people to come out on an afternoon or a Saturday or a Sunday or an evening to play a game with charts and whatever that they don't know what it's kind of all about. And there are a lot of just sort of intrinsic challenges in the process. And I think many of them exacerbated by the nature of our wonderful community. And I mean, it's a wonderful community, but it's got idiosyncrasies. So.
Well, I think there are, at least in my experience, there really are research techniques to sort of balance all of these types of inputs. That working with a consultant, I would assume that we would balance those kinds of inputs so that at the end of the day, the priorities by a broader segment of the community are understood. But I mean, at Ford, one of my jobs was marketing research director. So I had a fair amount of experience at this. So that might allay some of your concerns, Dan.
I think that's a great point. You're going to have single issue champions who are just there for that crosswalk and they don't care about anything else, or it could be anything in the community. You will have those people who go to that board, they take 5 dots and they continue to place them on that one intersection. We've seen that done.
We control those.
They take the whole box of stickies and they start putting them on that intersection. So that does happen.
Yeah.
And so the idea is here, we want to include a number of different techniques for public input. This is just one, and it's not necessarily quantitative analysis. It's an opportunity for people to say something, to be able to hear things that we might not have heard in another situation. So there might be an opportunity that somebody had a really creative idea or a need that we otherwise wouldn't have received. And then it's our job as a planning commission, as consultants, as project managers to funnel that information down. And the planning commission ultimately is going to make recommendations. So some of them are not going to make the cut. It happens, but you will learn some things that you didn't know before the process. But yes, not everyone is going to get their wish, but as long as if they have an opportunity to be heard and you are able to communicate those results back and how you determined how you were going to make your rankings and priorities. If you're open and honest and have these things online and the process is outlined, I think you'll have less pushback if that single issue is not addressed. And again, it's also a generalized plan. I mean, we can talk about things. We can keep things generalized in terms of crosswalks. You know, we could say you could always punt to a special study after the plan. So if one person wants a specific project, you could say, yes, there is community support for this crosswalk here as well as other areas. You might not have the answer during this project. As long as you're asking the questions in the master planning process, you can answer them in implementation during a special project or a sub area plan or just a different effort that would implement the plan.
I've got a question about the actual master plan that we have. So it says tri-community. Do we actually have a city master plan as well, or is it we're township, village of Douglas, and city are, this is it?
That's it.
We're going to talk about that, right?
Yep, last slide is a little bit about the comparison between both approaches. Okay, the next slide is concerning really incorporating a visionary plan. And what I say on the slide is a picture is worth 1,000 words. So I'm a true believer in images and in pictures, photographs, mapping, visualization. As much as you can make your master plan less text heavy and more exhibit heavy, have pictures to demonstrate concepts. You know, have concept plans mapped out to support your text. So I think the current master plan is, I believe, about 175 pages, and 90% of that is text.
Right.
For a community of this size, if it was just a city plan, I would say keep it to about 50 pages and make about half of that graphics and text. And then you can always have associated reports. You can have, the public input process can be an attachment, or can be just an associated report that's not necessarily adopted, but the document itself could be something that's user-friendly, concise, visually appealing, and something that people, the everyday member of the public can pick up, understand, look at these images, look at the pictures, and really understand what the vision is for the community. So what I say is don't just describe in words, show in images. You can have 3D perspective, concept plans, photos. And I think this is especially important for downtown areas and waterfront areas. So really the most, what attracts people here, what is, priority development areas, that's probably the most important to have visuals to really describe the goals and objectives. So, the current plan has a designation for the downtown as commercial. It's very generalized. It's between 3 communities. It generally talks about building type and placement and what you want to see in your downtown. So, you may want to go a bit further, whether it's a tri-communities plan or your own plan, to sketch out what redevelopment looks like, or if there are redevelopment sites. So I think a visionary plan is something that it really creates value in your community. It helps people to embrace the plan. They can see what's going to happen. And that can help guide future development when you have zoning decisions to make through special land use or PUD or anything like that. So. Okay, next best practice is complete streets. So a lot of plans, just plan for roads. They're really motorist oriented. The idea of complete streets is considering mobility for all users. You're designing that public space, that public right of way for all modes of transportation. So think about the pedestrian, the cyclist, disabled residents and visitors, and lastly, but not least, motorists. So you obviously need to ensure traffic runs smoothly and efficiently within the city. But complete streets is really a newer concept, which ensures that we're not just prioritizing roads to get cars in and out, but we're really maximizing the user experience once they do park their car, or if you do want to walk from home, or if you do want to ride your bike into town. So we need to really be planning for complete streets for all types of users, not just those driving in a car.
Would this also then be sort of forward-looking, because I'm sure a lot of our streets, a lot of community
Yes.
streets aren't like this now.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it has to be forward-looking. You know, a lot of times, well, in a master planning process, you know, they'll be excused, oh, we can't, this is how it is now, we can't change now because of this reason. Well, think 20 years. Is that something that would be attractive in 20 years? I mean, conditions can change. You know, there might be things that, you know, are just not going to change, and maybe they shouldn't change, but we do need to think forward. You know, if it's a, you know, if it's a 4-lane road with no on-street parking, you know, yes, well, maybe it should be 2 lanes with on-street parking on both sides, or a turn lane in the middle. Or what can we do to calm the traffic on that wider roadway? Or so there's a lot of things that might not be feasible right now, but when all the things are in place, conditions might be right to make those types of changes. Adding bike lanes or sidewalks, things like that as well. So. Okay, next best practice is missing middle housing. Now, missing middle housing is really everything between a single family house and an apartment complex. So a lot of zoning ordinances, a lot of master plans these days are really thinking in an older way of single family detached housing, and multifamily is anything with 3 units or more that's attached. There's a lot in the middle of that. And, you know, it could be accessory dwelling units over a garage or in the backyard, or even as attached to the house, duplexes, townhomes, quadplexes. You know, there's a lot in the middle, which is called the missing middle housing. In a lot of plans over the years, they, especially ones that are 10 or more years old, are really not considering that type of missing middle housing. Missing middle housing really helps to address, you know, housing diversity, the preference of housing type. You know, it allows people to age in place. You know, they may not be able to maintain a single family home with a yard. So, you know, it may be a duplex or a townhouse might be more attractive if it was a, you know, condo type ownership. You know, attached or accessory dwelling units would be, you know, good for college students or kids who want to stay around or coming back and getting themselves established. So it allows for different price points, different preference in terms of variety of housing, and then keeps people in the community that might otherwise have to go somewhere else to find suitable housing. So, you know, you don't want people to have to age out of the community because there's not something that suits their needs and preferences. So, and when we talk about, you know, attached housing, you know, there's a lot of reluctance to allow for different types of housing in areas that have been historically single family detached residential. One of the ideas with missing middle housing is wherever it goes, it should fit the scale and context of the neighborhood. So everything, what they say in missing middle housing is house scale. So you may have a you know, apartment building with a couple units, but it should be at the general scale of a house. We're not talking about massive barracks type facilities for multifamily, but, you know, how can we allow for attached housing that fits the context of your area and your neighborhoods without making something that people are going to not embrace? So it can be done, and there's zoning tools to do it. But, you know, that's a discussion that is first most appropriate to have at the master planning process.
Yeah, I can see, actually, this particular slide was shared in a recent training session. In this middle housing market in Saugatuck, particularly in my experience, has been missed. No pun intended. It's been missed because we are a single family residential community. And I see this as being an opportunity with this process of finding a different way to maybe make some of that available. Now, the challenge we have here is if you do this, this can be immediately turned into a short-term rental. I mean, and as it stands today, there is no limit on, other than any kind of zoning limit. There is no moratorium or any kind of ceiling on the number of rental properties that can exist in the city of Saugatuck. So I think that's going to be the balance that the planning commission and the city council, and I think the community is going to have to figure out, okay, if we want to create this middle housing, which would be for the people that work in town, there's gonna have to be something that's going to be put in place to make sure that it happens that way, as opposed to just adding more short-term rentals to the market.
And it isn't by accident. There is an active, vocal, you know, involved group of people who believe and will invest to create as much rental property in this community as can possibly be put in the community.
Mhm.
So it's not like, oh, that makes good, good sense. That'll be a slam dunk. It's not even close to a slam dunk. All you have to do is, as you well know, all you have to do is get it on the planning commission agenda, something related to short-term rentals. Those seats are going to be filled with people who are coming with guns loaded.
Yeah, so I didn't mean to open up a can of worms with that comment, but I think that the community is evolving into something that maybe not everybody's in support of. And so I think there's going to be some discussion regarding how do we create a middle housing market? Because I think it's missing, it's been missing. And so now we have to really think about it. And then you've got, and that's where you involve the village of Douglas and you involve the township as well, because they've got the property. We don't have the developable property. So
I was going to say, I think there's a great challenge in trying to really actively include the township because of different views and different.
yeah,
But if we could, this can't be done, but if we could only add a mile out in every direction from where the city ends, this kind of stuff would come into immediate focus because there's so much land there that begs to be developed in a way that relates to this place in both interests, but I say,
think that the township will be very involved. There's members on the board that are very involved and members on the planning commission that are very involved. And the planning and zoning administrator there is on the same level of expertise and education as David. So I think the township will be very involved in the contributor when we Douglas.
one of the planning commissioners from the township is actually in the citizen planning course with us.
Right.
Several of them are.
Oh, several. So,
I agree with you. Douglas will be the challenge.
yeah. So,
And if that's the case, then it's a bi-community plan. Or could be. I don't mean that.
I see this as being an opportunity.
Oh, me too. I mean, it's held us back for years, as
Mhm.
far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, you know, one of the very interesting things about that I've had conversations with some of the bar owners in town, what's kind of interesting is that during the week, there'll be people at the bars, there'll be people that lived and worked here. That's gone away because the people that work here in the restaurants and the other service industries leave town because they live somewhere else. So that part of the community actually, to me, is, I don't see it because that's not me, but the business owner tell me that segment's gone. They're here working and then they leave, whereas it used to be a more, so I just found that to be a very interesting comment from a couple of bar owners.
That segment is missing, and quite honestly, owner occupied in the off season is closer to non-existent
Well,
and only going one way.
and young families, couples.
Yeah.
Singles, families, young families, it's not affordable.
And I'm not an expert in the schools at all, but I've been hearing that if it wasn't for the school of choice, where people,
Yes.
the school, we wouldn't have a school system probably anymore. Because what is it, a 25% or something
I
like
think
that?
it's actually a little higher now.
I think it
Is
is
it?
too.
Yeah, close to,
Are from outside the district.
Right,
Okay.
right.
right. It's school and pay to come here. I mean, the school would be substantially smaller, very much smaller, because of these things, not partly the housing and the jobs, of course, but it's always been that way with the jobs. You wouldn't work necessarily here. You go to Holland, or mostly Holland, Zealand, some Grand Rapids. And well, anyway, of course, now in the digital age, I met with a guy 1,000,000 years ago in about 19. I went to his house for a little party. I was involved in another group and I was invited for a little party and we discussed. It was kind of neat. And Mr. McEnroe, he lived out on the old house property. He was married to a woman that her name was House. But anyway, we were discussing, he says, you know what's going to happen in the future is there's going to be these things in the computers and people will be able to work from anywhere. And this was about 1980, around 1980. And he was talking about that. And he says, you know, people will be able to work anywhere that there's telephone lines. And well, that's what he, you know, attributed to. But of course, we had that for a while. It was crummy internet. But you know, this is just now really starting to come to fruition. And you know, you don't need. You know, so, anyways, I won't get too far off the topic. We've been debating this type of thing forever. And I can't say is how we've made real good progress. The town's still holding together, but that's, and, you know, things like the SCA have done a remarkable job of, I think, helping to enliven the town and culturally and socially and but we need some more things.
Mhm.
Well, it's a good conversation. I think with any policy decision or any change in direction, there's going to be positive and negative impacts, and the master plan can help to anticipate those and then determine what you need to balance it out. So I think this is the time to have that conversation, though.
The township aspect is very encouraging. That outlook is very encouraging. Honestly, I don't care about Douglas. I care less about Douglas because I think Saugatuck's future is much more dependent on the township than it is on whatever Douglas would do.
But we love them.
I don't not like them. I'm just saying, they have a very inwardly focused
Yeah, well, they're
fortress mentality and quite honestly, an envy or of Saugatuck and name and all
always
that,
have.
all of it
Always
conspires
have.
against taking anything that has anything to do with Saugatuck as a driver for what they're doing. All you have to look at the trail, look at the bike trail through there. Perfect example. Perfect example. Got built before anybody
All we can
talked to
do is
anybody.
what we can do and try to do the best we can.
But the opportunity is, the significant opportunity is working with the township.
All right, on to future land use planning. As most know, the future land use plan is probably the most, a lot of people think this is the most important part of a master planning process, and it's especially in a township. But there, in a city atmosphere, you have a lot more diversity in terms of important parts of this plan. But future land use planning is important because you're establishing the different categories which are going to have direct relationships to zoning districts. So the map on the right that's the city of Hart, and that's their future land use plan. So it's divided into a number of categories. And then below it is what we call a zoning plan. So I know it's not intended to be read this evening, but the left column is the future land use designation and the right column is the corresponding zoning. So what we'd have there is like, for instance, traditional single-family residential, a future land use category, would relate to the A residential district in the city of Hart. However, we go on to say that the next category is mixed single-family residential. So that's intended to be kind of a missing middle type future land use category where we would allow for a mix of single-family detached.
Which color is that?
Let me see, the mixed is actually, so if you see the downtown area,
Yeah, I know Hart, that's why I'm asking.
Actually, I think I have two different, well, in Hart would be the dark yellow that surrounds the downtown. So the idea there was that we would allow for denser housing types, attached townhouses, things like that in close proximity to the downtown. Whereas the single family neighborhoods would generally stay the same. They wanted to keep those generally single family detached, but we identified an area where we could have denser housing and attached housing. And then the zoning plan at that point states that there is no zoning district to implement that future land use category. So in that corresponding table between future land use and zoning, there are going to be some cells that are going to be empty because there just is not a zoning district to implement that recommendation. So what the master plan then does is recommend a new zoning district and a zoning map amendment for a certain area. So that's just the relationship between future land use planning and zoning. And then the future land use plan in general, really, it's not as rigid as zoning. So it's, in some cases, it's not even parcel based. Sometimes we actually turn the parcels off or we make them very light so that when you look at the map, you're mainly looking at the colors around different neighborhoods and blocks. You can still have the parcel lines on, and it's, you can generally treat it as a parcel based map, but the idea with future land use planning is that you can blur your eyes a little bit with the boundaries and make your decisions on case by case basis. So if you had a rezoning, it was kind of on the borderline. Planning commission would be able to make the call if it really fit within a mixed use district or a residential district, if it was right on the borderline. So the intent of a master plan is to allow for some flexibility. It's not a zoning map, but it helps to influence your decisions on zoning. So some departure is appropriate in certain cases, and the master plan also does anticipate that there's going to be incremental changes over time. So you may say that, this area is ripe for growth and redevelopment. The next area is not, but maybe in 20 years it would be. Okay, well, you don't have to include that now, but you can look at it in a way that future land use category could expand incrementally. And you can think about that, but you don't necessarily need to put it on the map for 30 years out. Okay, we'll start to wrap up here because we're getting close to 8 o'clock. But we talked a little bit before about the implementation and work plan. So I believe this is the last best practice is implementation. So you'll set overall goals and principles, and you can have really a policy-based plan or an action-based plan. In a township perspective, a lot of times, if there's not a lot going on, it's more of a policy-based plan. For instance, like you would just follow the future land use plan for zoning decisions. Whereas in a more urban environment, you may, like a city, you would have actions. It may be capital improvements, partnerships, zoning amendments. So there might be a lot more actions that you would actually accomplish in an urban environment, whereas in a more rural township, it would be mainly a policy-based document. But I think for the city, you'd probably have both policies and actions. Policy is, we will do this when this type of situation arises, whereas an action is something that you are actually going to accomplish, hopefully within a 5-year time period. And the plan then would actually have a table similar to this. This is what I recommend. You would list those actions. You would classify them as a, what type? Are they a program? Is it a zoning change, an ordinance, partnership, a capital improvement where you need a budget for it? Then you would prioritize them. So you do low, medium, high priority, and then you would plan them out. Is this an immediate, 1 to 3 year project? Is it 4 or 5 year or 5 year beyond? Maybe that's the next planning period, but you still want to plant the seed in this plan. So you would begin to prioritize those projects and set a work plan for your annual review. So it's also important to identify responsible parties. So a lot of time the planning commission carries the heaviest load, but you want to identify who else is going to assist. It may be a partnership with the township. It may be a joint effort with the council. It may be citizens groups that you're partnering with. So you want to assign, to the best of your ability now, responsible parties so that you're held accountable to moving forward with the actions that you put in the plan. So again, I think that I would recommend that you look at master planning as a guide and in a living document that you're going to continue to work on an annual basis. Okay, process real quick. I think you probably went through this in Citizen Planner. So I probably won't go through this much. But the first thing you do is an intent to plan notice, and that goes to your adjacent jurisdictions, utility companies. So you're really, that kind of sets the seed for regional involvement. A lot of times you don't hear back from those agencies that you send the letters to, but I think the spirit of the act is that you are reaching out. So you can certainly go beyond the simple form letter that we do to start every master planning process. You can invite people to the table, but that's the initial step. A kickoff process, you can have meetings, tours. initial reconnaissance, that's where you're really learning about the community. The character analysis would occur at this point as well. Next is your background. So your consulting team or your project manager is going to work on the demographic analysis, mapping, inventory of conditions and resources in the community. And then I would suggest initial public involvement pretty early in that process. So before you start putting pen to paper, you start asking the questions to the community. You have those discussions, those interviews, and so on. From there, the Planning Commission or possibly a subcommittee of the Planning Commission is going to really kind of set the direction of the plan based on that input and based on your project manager or your consultant's recommendations. And then you'll begin to draft the plan. At that point, the Planning Commission or subcommittee would you might want to do secondary public involvement. It's not required, but you could do something where you have another workshop showing the results of the draft. And that would be ahead of the public hearing, which is the official part of the process. But you could have a less formal open house or workshop to present the results, knowing that there's still time to make changes or take more input. From there, then, if the Planning Commission and City Council are comfortable, you could put the draft out for outside agency review. That's 42 to 63 days, depending on if it's a full rewrite or just an update. So if it's just a minor update, it's just a 42-day period. If you're throwing the plan away and starting fresh, it's a 63-day process. As soon as that's up, you can have the Planning Commission public hearing. So that's the official public hearing where you officially take the record of public comment, which is required by the act. After then your recommendation, you would recommend approval through a resolution, and then ultimately City Council would have the final authority over that plan. There are some cases where the City Council could delegate that responsibility to the Planning Commission to adopt and approve, but in most cases, the City Council will assert their authority to have the final say on the plan. And so I really haven't experienced a city council or a township board not assert that authority, but it can happen.
Dave, how long does this process typically take?
A comprehensive master planning process could take up to a year.
Okay.
Now, if it was, you could certainly do a 6-month process. I've even seen 3 or 4 months if it was just to update the map, for instance. If it was just something that for instance, sometimes you may get a request to update the map so that it would support a rezoning. So you would go through a process to update the map. Some communities actually open it up based on request. So the bare minimum just to make a small tweak could be 3 months. An abbreviated, expedited process could be 6 months. But if you're looking to get significant involvement, it's going to be 9 to 12 months. Anything more than 12 months, your process is dragging on, it's not effective, and you've lost momentum.
Right.
Roles, I think this is the second to last slide. Roles, you would certainly have a point of contact, a project manager for the city. That could be the zoning administrator, it could be your planner, it could be your city manager. They could manage the project, or they could be the primary point of contact for administration of the budget and the managing the consultant that you might work with. So the next point is you could have a consultant project manager. You'd want someone with both planning and zoning experience. Definitely recommend waterfronts and downtown experience and small city experience. They would likely either have a team or trusted sub-consultants to do urban design work or housing analysis, look at market analysis, mapping, and so on. So larger firms might have that all under one roof, but even in some cases, larger firms will sub out some work. Smaller firms will certainly have trusted project partners that they have experience with.
What did that cost Hart, if you don't mind my asking?
I'm sorry, in Hart?
Yeah.
Well, Hart was probably about $15,000 to $20,000 for that plan. So that's a small community. It was a fairly expedited process. So I think most small community, small township master plans, if you're going to do a pretty good update to it, could be that is a low end, 15 to 20. Then when you start getting more public involvement or subs or other elements to it, the price starts going up at that point.
Understood. Thank you.
you could have a steering committee or subcommittees. You may just say the planning commission is going to be the primary driver of this effort. In some cases, you may want to have a smaller subcommittee. In a small city, it may just be the planning commission doing that work. But you could certainly have a subcommittee or have others join you here for that type of work. So, but that can certainly be to the discretion of the city and the planning commission. The planning commission and the council have their roles for the recommendation and approval of the document. Okay, last slide then is the tri-communities plan versus a city-specific plan. There are pros and cons of both. There's no right answer or wrong answer. It's just what best suits the needs of you as a planning commission, city council, and your community. If you have a city-only plan, certainly you have a more focused effort. It's a smaller geography. It's probably a quicker process. It's a plan that's probably concise, short, and more user-friendly because it's focused. And that does not rule out that the opportunity to work with the township or Douglas. That it doesn't at all. It shouldn't. Even if you did a city plan by yourself, you should certainly have that regional cooperation. The tri-community plan, obviously, it's a multi-jurisdictional effort, but that's built on your past cooperative effort and the cooperative spirit of that planning process. You have many more stakeholders, but you have a lot of issues of common concern. You have the thing, the waterways are certainly going to affect. They water and environmental issues don't know jurisdictional boundaries. So traffic issues, roadways, they cross boundaries. So those are certainly issues of common concern that are good to address in a regional plan. But there is definitely the potential for less individual city focus and more generalization. And we certainly see that in your master plan. The future land use categories are somewhat overly broad in certain cases. And it could result in a lengthier process when you have so many stakeholders in 3 jurisdictions working together. So there are pros and cons. I mean, there's a cooperative effort of a tri-community plan, but that doesn't mean you can't have that in a city plan. So that's something for the planning commission probably to, at some point, to make a recommendation on as you think about what type of scope and process would best serve your needs. So we
Thank you,
are
Dave.
just past 8. Any final questions or concerns?
Yeah, just thank you very much for being here this evening. This has been very helpful. A couple questions is one is that the assumption is that the tri-community master plan is going to continue to be the basis for cooperation between the communities, that someone is not going to, one municipality is going to carve themselves out and do their own plan. I don't know if that's a safe assumption or not, but 2 is that would we then hire a project manager such as yourself for all 3? Is that how that, or does each community hire its own project consultant that then they work jointly together to work with the planning commission, city council? And
If it was a tri-community plan, you'd probably still have one main project manager, but there would be involvement in contractually that would be worked out between the 3 jurisdictions, of course. But at that point, you would certainly have probably a committee of the 3 jurisdictions to really be the driver of the effort. And that's where it then becomes complicated, because you'd have a committee that's not necessarily your planning commission. You might have planning commission members, probably a non-quorum amounts, you probably up to 3 maybe. And then each jurisdiction would have similar representation. So it's a little bit different process, but the planning commission would still need to be tied into everything that's going on, and those members of that committee would have to report back probably every month. But it can all be worked out, but it would probably need a single point of contact from a project manager consultant to work with that subcommittee.
yeah, that would be my suggested approach too. So just thank you.
If there were individual managers from each jurisdiction, that's a lot of cooks in the kitchen. I don't know a lot of consultants that would be comfortable with that, but it could happen. But it's typically one person needs to run the show and facilitate the committee.
Yeah, I would agree. Thanks, David.
That leads me to a point and a comment I wanted to make as to the needing a person to lead and coordinate the effort from the perspective of this planning commission. And I'm not positive it's within my purview to, but I'm going to assume that it is, to seek that from one of our planning commission members with whom I spoke this afternoon on this exact subject, and who has commanding experience, in my view, in this kind of challenging, multifaceted, multidimensional civic projects, as well as corporate, private enterprise sorts of similarly complex and challenging leadership. And so I've asked Bobby Gaunt if she would be willing to step into that role. And Bobby and I both, we share an experience that touched on the tri-community plan as it was intended to come into, to exert itself into actual change in the community, which was distinctly unpleasant and unsuccessful. And so, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but she rightly questioned, as would I, as I told her, if the situation, if the two parties were reversed, as would I, you know, if this thing goes south, or if this thing goes wide of what she considers a useful exercise, a purposeful exercise that actually has some reasonable chance of accomplishing something halfway as important. If it goes wide of that, she intends to bail, and she would bail with my blessing. And we won't find anyone else to take her place, I might add. But I wanted to let you guys know that. And certainly feel free, even with Bobby here, to discuss it or challenge it if you want. But as an effort to start this rather long project, which if it got done in a year would be nothing shy of a miracle, in my opinion. But that we got to get this going, and we need somebody who knows how to get things going, get things done, make things happen, get people to cooperate, carry the torch on behalf of this committee. And I would hope and expect that committee members would be able to be resources to be drawn on as needed in whatever numbers needed, to include all of us at once, if that's what it makes sense. But that's what I serve up to you.
Thank you, Dan, I think. I actually, to be, as I always will be with all of you, completely candid. I very reluctantly agreed. My experience with the Tri-Community Plan has not been encouraging for me. In that, in my experience over my years here, considering all of the work that goes into it and the import of the document itself, in terms of future planning, my impression is, and it may be a completely unfair one, and I'd be happy to, in fact, I would welcome people to convince me otherwise. I don't think it's often referred to. So, but because I do believe it's important, critically important to the future of not only our community, but also the tri-community, I'm willing to try. I do agree that it needs someone, a consultant, to lead the process if we are going to work together with the township and with Douglas. And I am certainly going to need the support of each and every one of you in terms of organizing and getting this underway. So that's where I'm at. And as Dan said, and I was very explicit with him, I'm willing to give it a try. But if I see repeated patterns of have to do it, but not really crazy about the idea, and we'll just put it on a shelf when we're finished with it, that's when I've said this to close friends of mine, I figure I've got at most 25 years left on this earth, and I'd like to make meaning in those 25 years. And if this goes as it has gone in the past, it won't be making very much meaning. So I don't have time for that. So that's where I'm at.
Well said.
Thank you. I'll give you a little bit of an update of what staff has been doing so far. I have met with Lene from the township, and Nick participated in that meeting by phone. The detailed demographics that are coming out of the census are not out there yet. The major part of the census is out there, the big numbers. But the detailed demographics and the trends are not available yet. We are going to meet in the end of July to touch base again where we all are. And the three of us will pull something together by, hopefully, by the end of the summer, but more realistically, probably Thanksgiving, for a plan of how we want to work with this, who's going to be responsible for what, and not any details of the plan, but the details of the process. So we will be reporting back to you after we have those meetings in July and then in the fall.
And Cindy and you and I can talk as we go along,
Yes.
because I
Most
really need to understand the process.
Yes.
Can I make a quick comment?
Of course.
I fully support Dan's recommendation for Bobby and thank you for the willingness to step up and give this a shot. I think it's important that the city is established early on who that representative from the planning commission will be, so that Cindy's got support from the commission. I don't know if the city of Douglas or if the township has done this yet, but I think that's a really good sign on our part that we're going to be serious about this and we want to get started early. We've had David do his presentation, so I think we're just starting on the right foot here.
I think the township has been pushing harder than the city to get this started.
Good.
Perfect.
By the way, one of the positive, well, it's all been positive, actually. I've really enjoyed Citizen Planner. And one of the questions that I asked was, what other communities in the state of Michigan basically operate successfully with the tri-community plan? And they were kind enough to give me the names of several communities. And Cindy and I have been in touch about that. So, because I was hoping that we might be able to use them as a role model in terms of what works and what doesn't and that sort of thing. So I'll be sharing that with all of you too.
That's encouraging because as you were talking, I was thinking she's going to say zero. Nobody found anything.
Three tri-communities. So, and Cindy said that one of them will be probably very excellent in terms of perhaps modeling some of their best practices. So we'll see.
Go, Bobby, go.
Go. Only 25 years.
And can we get, are we gonna be able to get a copy of the presentation? Okay,
Yes.
that was very helpful, so.
Thank you, ma'am. Good question.
Okay, that brings us, I think, thank you, David, very much.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Nice to
David.
see everyone.
Very helpful. Good to see you again. Come back anytime. Into item number 6, old business, special land use and site plan review for 449 Water and 121 Mary Street, which was tabled from our February 17th meeting. Thanks.
Dan, does the public hearing continue on?
No,
or-
we closed, for information, we closed the public hearing toward the end of last meeting. So we will at the appropriate time reopen or open a new public hearing tonight. That's the plan. I think, Cindy, do you want to kind of encapsulate here? There's, to say the least, there's been a good bit of input from all sides on this to include this latest document this evening.
There has been, and I would be willing to give an overview of where we are with this. And maybe clarify some questions or issues that have arisen. So when you're ready for me to do that, let me know.
I think we can do that prior to starting any public hearing.
If I can get the right document.
Cindy, is the document you passed out tonight, I'm sorry, may I speak?
Big pardon?
May I speak? May I ask? a
Of
question?
course, of course.
Is the document you passed out tonight the same document that you forwarded to us
Yes,
March the
the,
7th?
the packet is the same.
Okay,
I just have to find this thing.
Oh, so is this document in the packet?
no, it
No.
wasn't.
Oh, no,
okay.
the one that I passed out, that's from the applicant.
That's from the applicant.
That is from the applicant.
Oh, okay.
The one that I passed out. The ones that are on your desk are the packet. The communications from the two, I did miss the one communication, but relative to the information that we have and issues that came up, one of the things that was on your table is a sheet that looks like, or a package that looks like this on the top, on the first page. And that is about nonconformities. Kind of lays out the whole explanation of why this is not a violation of a non-conforming structure. So as you go through it, you can see the highlighted topics with a red comment behind that says does not apply. These are conforming uses. It's a non-conforming structure. The top page is the quote that you were given by someone else. And that talks about what cannot be done without a permit. So the applicant did clean out the house, which is not a violation of any of the items in this section. Sections of this that apply, no building or structure shall thereafter be erected. Nothing was erected. Or relocated or altered in its exterior dimension or use, and no excavation will begin. So there hasn't been any excavation. There hasn't been any alteration in exterior dimension, and there hasn't been any alteration in the use. So those things are non-issues. The only thing that the applicant did to deserve a stop work order was take out an exterior stained glass window before Historic District approved it. So that was the only issue that I could say this is a violation. If you look through these topics, non-conforming lots, that does not apply. It's a conforming lot. Non-conforming uses, not involving a building or a structure, that does not comply. All those uses are permitted uses. The non-conforming structures, this one does apply. And the non-conforming structure issue meets the standards of the zoning ordinance, so that's not an issue. And non-conforming use of a structure, that does not apply because all the uses current and anticipated are conforming uses. Change in use or substitution, this does not apply because this says a non-conforming use shall not be changed to another non-conforming use. Again, all the uses are conforming. And then it goes on to some other topics that really don't apply. So just thought I'd put that one to rest, but there's no violations as to nonconformities in this situation. The other one was the content of the site plan. What is needed? What's the minimum requirements for a site plan? The site plan section of the ordinance is a little bit different than the application, which I didn't realize until I went over both of them. There is no requirement for a professionally drawn, sealed, or stamped site plan. The minimum information in the site plan application is contact information for the applicant and a survey. Well, we have both of those things. The other things that are requested but not required in a site plan are things that apply to that proposition or that proposal. In this case, the site plan is overlaid onto the survey, and it shows the features that are going to be created, adjusted, or changed. There is no requirement in the site plan review for floor plans, seating plans, or anything like that. It's just, what are you going to do to the physical characteristics of the site? The other thing that's important to note is the reason that they're here is not necessarily specific for a site plan review. The reason they're here is because they are requesting a special land use of expanding a restaurant or expanding the seating. And that is defined as something that could create something that looks like a nuisance-like situation. And in the definition of special land use, it refers to sections of the ordinance that talk about special land use. And they talk about how are you going to mitigate any negative impacts in the neighborhood. And then kind of in passing in that section, it says, well, and you have to have a site plan review. But the focus of this is the special land use. So I just want to make sure that you're aware that that's really the main reason that we're having this application brought to the Planning Commission. I do have another document showing that, but it's pretty late for me to be trying to figure out technology at this point. But if you look just at the definition of special land use in your ordinance, it says compliant with sections 154-80 to 154-86. Maybe I'm kind of guessing at those numbers, but 92. Those are the sections that relate to special land use. And when you get into the special land use section, then it refers you back to, well, you have to have a site plan review too. So just wanted to share that. And then in relationship to what the applicant handed out, the handout about occupant load, I just want to make it really clear that there are 3 different kinds of occupant load. If you look up here above the elevator, it tells what the occupant load of this room is. If you get more than that, you're in violation of the fire code. And that number is 89. So I would ask you to picture 89 people in here. And I think that since I've worked here, there's probably been 2 situations where it might have been getting close to that. But that number is just violation of the fire code. And it's called the design occupant load. And you use it to design your bathrooms and your exits and your exit signs and your door hardware. That's the purpose of the design occupant load. That is established by the applicant's architect. He will do those calculations. They will be, of course, reviewed by the building inspector and the fire department. But those are design occupant loads. The only time that I can remember that we had anywhere close to 89 people in here is when we were doing the hearings for the police department. And that was enough people that we counted them as they came in and went out. Then there's the actual occupant load. Because the sign says 89 occupants, that doesn't mean we put out 89 chairs. The actual occupant load is what's comfortable for the for this area that they're going to be occupying. Then there is the limited occupant load, which you are allowed to impose conditions. If you should be so inclined to grant this, you could say, okay, the design occupant load may be 77, the comfortable occupant load may be 50, but we are going to say, limit your occupancy to 25 or 30 or 27. But that's your discretion to mitigate those negative impacts in the area. I just want to make it clear, design occupant load is important for designing the structure with exiting and door hardware and bathrooms. But it doesn't mean that doesn't mean you have to stick to that. You can go less. So any questions about those things?
Questions? I do have, not necessarily related to that, but I do have a question about the propriety of accepting information 2 minutes before the meeting begins.
That's pretty common in all of our meetings. There's last minute changes, there's requests for more information. There's things that were unknown. I would say it's probably most common in the Historic District Commission that we accept changes. And also in Zoning Board of Appeals, because they may not have answered all the questions up front, but I contact them and say, we need more information. And sometimes it doesn't get to us until the meeting, but that's not uncommon. And this information that you have really accepted at this point, this document just talks about how the occupant load was calculated. It doesn't have anything to do with the location of the building, anything to do with the site. It just has to do how the design occupant load was calculated.
I think I already know the answer to this, and I'd asked you previously too, about the non-conforming uses that you're saying that change of use is permissible here, a change of use from residential to restaurant, bar restaurant. You're saying there's nothing here that would necessarily change the status of this building because it's a change of use request.
It's a change in the intensity of the use, but it's a permitted use. It's not a non-conforming use. So that does not, most of that section on non-conforming uses does not apply. The one section that does apply is if you're going to make the building larger, then the parts that are larger cannot
Right.
encroach into the setbacks.
And it doesn't throw it into the category of accessory building.
No,
What it does, however, is kick off certain criteria in the, what was it, 15480, the special land use, or
it's a change in the intensity of the use, but it's not a change in the use. Well, it's a change of use. It's a change in the intensity of the use.
It's a difficult situation for planning commission as well as for the applicant as well as the neighbors. Sensitive to all of that. My concern though, at the moment is that we've seen 3 different proposals, slight adjustments each time that the applicant has been here. Whatever site plan we end up approving becomes a contract between the city and the commission and the applicant. I am not satisfied that the site plan that we've been presented with meets that standard from my perspective. I mean, we can go through 154.061, the applications, and there's different points in there that I do not think this applicant has met yet. This has to be, in my opinion, a very black and white decision. And I'm not comfortable at this point of saying the site plan that we have presented, and I appreciate the graphics. Very nice. There's obviously an intent here to make this a quality project, but I'm not comfortable from a site plan standpoint of saying we've got what I need to say yes or no. And then secondly, then once we get that decision, then the next step of discussion is regarding concerns, the neighbors, and some of the concerns have been brought to us. And I think there will have to, at least from my perspective, there will have to be some discussions regarding some limitations on seating, occupancy, noise.
And you can set all of that.
Yeah, right,
Yeah.
correct. We've not had that discussion. I don't feel comfortable having that discussion until I personally have a site plan that meets all of these conditions that's set in front of us that we can discuss and sign off on.
I guess I'm not sure what the site plan is
So-
lacking.
So from my perspective, a survey with highlighters, in my mind, in my opinion, does not represent an adequate site plan.
What's missing from it?
I'd like to see a more visual perspective of this, and the pictures are somewhat close to that, but I'd like to see a better site plan with the lighting on here and showing the range and so forth.
I think that when this application came in, it came in for historic district as well as site plan review and special land use. And this page may have been left off of the planning packet. But this is the lighting fixtures that would be installed. And those are gas lights. I had the advantage of sitting through the Historic District Commission, so.
As another example on this, the handwritten survey marks do not include, from what I can see, the actual signs, including type, locations, and sizes. I know that was discussed
What?
previous,
I'm
the
sorry.
signs,
The signs?
signage, which are not indicated on this, size and so forth. I know that the Historic District Commission, I think, had some conversation about that. We saw some previous presentations, but I'm not seeing it on here either. So really what I'm speaking to is what I expect to see from a site plan review, which can see all those aspects of these conditions in 154.061.
Okay.
Which then brings us to whether it is purposeful to proceed to a public hearing on this at this point or not. If we, it's weird tonight because there's only 4 of us here.
That's fine.
Five of us here.
Oh, I'm sorry. I always forget to count myself, but we're missing 2 members in any case.
Was it a short joke?
I don't make short jokes. I learned my lesson a long time ago about that. So, and I don't have, I'd appreciate your guidance on that, Cindy, whether we should proceed to a public hearing or whether we should, I mean, Commissioner Gardner makes good points. I think others have asked similar questions. Some of this driven by our, literally everyone here, our joint participation in the Michigan State series of discussions, which included in some great detail the the site plan review, and which Russ accurately quoted a key part. And there was a fair amount of emphasis in there that on that exact point, what you approve is a contract
Mhm.
in all its detail. And I think that that puts a weight on the planning commission to make sure that according to the ordinance, all of that detail is there. And and Russ also makes the point that it has changed. Some of those details have changed each time we get together. To include even, I mean, yes, I get what the purpose of this was, what it was in terms of setting occupant load for purposes kind of beyond our purview. But nonetheless, it includes in there a basis for an occupancy look by the commission, which does have interest in the occupancy. And it's the first time we've seen it. I'm talking about a floor plan. I'm only saying this is the first time there's been a hard number put to a potential occupancy. But in prior, it's been a range with no calculations to support the range, just a here's what I think kind of thing, which is fine, I guess. But that stuff, we're bound by the ordinance. Bound by to do what it says so that, and without those details in my mind, a crisp, understandable, single packet with at least some amount of time, reasonable amount of time to look at that packet. We would not be acting on this one way or the other. Is not performing the duty that we're supposed to sit up here and do. So.
That's a question I have for Chris. What exactly items do you want?
It is also not it's not the planning commission's function to run a seminar on what we need. It's here. It's written down. We didn't write it. I didn't write it. None of these people had anything to do with writing it. It's written down here, and that's what we're bound by. So I mean, yeah, I could, yeah, of course. I mean, and it's fairly didactic. I mean, it's fairly clear. And it's not all, even in the revisions and additions and additional documents, whatever, it's not all there.
Okay, so one question I have is the definition of site.
Excuse me, I'm afraid I don't know you. Could you introduce yourself?
Consulting on this.
Okay, thank you.
Right, now the builder in the area, so my question is the definition, I guess, is maybe there's different definitions. The site plan to me, okay, so, and I don't think, I guess I'm a little off on this part then. Is the site plan is what I turn into a house or building, and it shows where the house is gonna sit, and we meet all the setbacks in that. I'm thinking in that ordinance, the site plan has some more items that we have to add to it. And I'll definitely.
It has a specific list of 17 such items.
Then why isn't it in the application?
Not all,
It's in the ordinance. Or you don't dump the ordinance into the application. We don't, the ordinances are what they are. That's, again, we don't set that. We don't put ordinances in application. That's not what we do. We just, all our job is to make sure the submission meets the standards in the ordinance, and then to make whatever judgments once the.
Fair enough, then, so we need to go through all 17 and list those ones that are, there might be some that are.
Correct.
And just list them all, not, I guess the site plan, and this is what I use as a site plan, but do you want them on this, or do you want them on a form of some sort?
well, for instance, one of the items, excuse me here, item let's
I
see.
have it up on the screen.
Yeah, I can't. Let's see.
No, that's not it.
This is not the application, this is the ordinance.
Yeah.
Yeah,
hold on a
that's what
second
we're
here.
looking at.
Let's see.
That's the beginning of 061.
Yeah. it doesn't-
Yeah, item 14, Mr. Murphy. Elevations of proposed buildings drawn to an appropriate scale shall include front, side, and rear views, heights at street level, basement, floor level, et cetera, et cetera. So item 14, in my opinion, has not yet been met. The pictures that have been brought are nice. It shows a good representation of where this is going, but it's not a. And
Things that say NA, I guess, that's fine.
Topographical elevations at 2 feet intervals. This is a relatively flat piece of land, so I didn't think that was
Right.
required.
Yep.
Written statements relative to the effects of existing traffic capacity in streets and proposed development impact on schools, existing utilities or natural features. In my experience, that would not be applicable. It's not going to have any impact on schools, existing utilities or natural features. Traffic capacity, that's not enough capacity of an increase to be of concern. Location and dimension of all access drives, including driveway dimensions, pavement marking. That's not applicable because there are no drives or access points.
so
Open
item,
spaces and recreational facilities, not applicable.
so item 11, though, signs, including type, locations and sizes, I think are applicable in this situation because there's going to be some external signage, correct?
Right, and that can be done in a separate permit.
And number 10.
Separate permit, but it's required in the site plan.
Yes, it does say that it's
Yeah.
required in the site plan.
That's what I'm speaking.
And again, it's,
But we don't know what sign we're doing yet, and we can
Yeah.
apply for sign permit.
What,
Like, it's another step. to do
what
sign
I'm,
permit.
what I'm driving towards personally as a planning commission member is something that is as close as possible to what you finally intend to do.
With what?
All of
With the
this,
sign.
all of this.
Your
Yep,
property.
yep. Because yeah, I'm sorry,
The property.
correct. Because this, as was stated, becomes a contract between the planning commission, the city and the business owner and the applicant.
Yes.
So that needs to be as complete as you can possibly make it with everything you plan to do. And I don't feel it's there yet.
So the sign, so 11 is what. we're missing.
That's one of them.
I mean,
Yeah.
the ordinance is available. I mean, I'm happy to,
Well, I mean, she went through it with us, so this is what I thought we were okay at. Do you understand? I thought we were good.
Mhm.
well, I'm not,
We just need to go through all 17 items. Add the things that we know we can add, plantings, sign location. and
Exactly.
things that we go through and things like that. If Christine decide to move the sign, then we come back or. go to the
Exactly.
Sign committee and say, well, we got a little revision on it.
and so that you understand, it's just, this is not about only this event, this application. We ignore the sign on this one, little thing, decide how it's going to be later. And with the next application we get is from somebody redeveloping Coral Gables or whatever, and they say, hell, you ignored the sign there, you just ignore it here. And that's the problem that becomes our problem.
I kind of read that section as internal traffic signage, because if they want to change the name of the business, then we have to do a whole new site plan review. I just don't think that is something that the planning commission should be doing. Or if they sell it to another business and they want to have a different sign, I don't think that requires a full planning commission site plan review for a sign.
I don't know. I
I
would
think it's
think,
internal traffic.
I don't
signage.
think you're approving, planning commission would be so interested in what color the sign is, but the amount of space the sign occupies would be a very serious concern of mine.
And that
And
would be
again,
covered
because
by a
you're going to
sign
put that
permit.
on the land, and that is going forward to the next guy. And yeah, they could change the color, but they can't go beyond pick a number, 2 by 5 or
Can't
whatever.
go
the hell.
by, they can't go beyond what's in the zoning ordinance, what's allowed for signage. So I really read that section is for internal, this site plan review application is for any kind of development. It could be anything from a whole subdivision to something that really, until a year or two ago, didn't even require site plan review or a special land use. It was permitted as a use by right. Not that that matters to you, but it's kind of a scale of things. Are we looking at, really looking at a site plan, or are we really looking at the special land use? So that's, you guys are gonna decide that.
I don't
not
think
me.
we can have a site plan review and not uphold what the ordinance requires to be in a site plan. However,
That
you know,
is-
odd that may be, or unusual, or even not important in the grand
Even-
scheme of things. I would not, you know, again, they
This-
put us up here to uphold these freaking
If you
ordinances.
look at number 3 up on the screen, the minimum site plan review requirements are the applicant's name and address,
Mhm.
the applicant's telephone number and email address, and a survey showing the property corners and the proposed construction. We've got that.
Mhm.
The additional information shall require some or all of the following information unless waived by the zoning
Right.
administrator. So some of it is, there is some of it there. There's not all of it because it doesn't require all of it.
Correct, right.
So
Mhm.
if you read that in,
Well, if that's the case,
that is,
and you want, then I think what information requirement is being waived by the zoning administrator should not be an NA. It should be flagged as waived by the zoning administrator,
okay.
so that we know what's, you know, you're not,
And there are some discrepancies between the ordinance and the application that I didn't realize until just recently when I was comparing, because I didn't create that application, so.
I just, to Dan, to your point about the course we've been taking, one of the things that strikes me about our requirements that I think we saw in our course goes to dimensions and setbacks. Those are both mentioned. I presume in this situation, they weren't waived, but that's, the dimensions are also part of what I think
And they're on the
We-
survey.
of all this new structures and
with the exception of elevations, I guess.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean,
It's up to you guys.
I'm inclined, I'm inclined to think it would be in everyone's interest to dot the i's and cross the t's and either, and to include adding, if that's your judgment and certainly within your purview, items that are waived by the zoning administrator, so we knock them off our list of things to consider out of the ordinance. Fine with that. But I think it needs to be flagged as that, not just NA. I'm not criticizing that, I'm just saying. We haven't, I'm not sure honestly where we are in this process, because
I think
we've
you'll
carried
see-
on as though there was a public hearing going on, but there isn't one going
No,
on.
we
We're
haven't
just yakking.
decided to open it or not. But you can see in the comments, in the memo that I always do, the memo with the comments. That is where you will see, if I don't specifically call it out as waiving it, but number 9 here. There'd be little or no change to the existing site. And we're looking at the site. So I do call that out in the comments, or try to call that out in the comments where something's not applicable. And I can be more specific in the future. Like number 7. Is it convenient to vehicular and pedestrian traffic routes? The project should not impact traffic at all, therefore planning commission may find this standard is met. Rather than saying, I waived this condition, or I waived this requirement, I can put that in there. Do you think that would be more?
I think maybe I'll defer to the view of the majority, but I think when something's waived, it should be, because waived has and relates to your authority versus our authority, and that's important to know why it is the way it is. And, you know, so the clearer we can be on that, the better. And as I say, if the argument that in the interim, we could clean that up on our end too, and then come back to this with clear eyes on both sides. Believe me, we want to get through this as much as
So
you
Pat,
do.
have we answered the question relative to what it is they need to provide us?
Do you think we've answered?
No. I don't know what else you need from me.
I
I mean, I feel.
have it pretty much.
I don't think it's like write it, I mean, it's not write a new book. It's literally check a few boxes with information I'm confident you have. And ideally, all under one cover or staple rather than six, I think at this point, different assemblages of information. So. Okay, we good to move on? So I'm not going to open a public hearing. I was going to say, I'm sure time is of the essence on your side. And I don't think it would be taxing on the planning commission to do a meeting on this sooner, to include next week, as far as I'm concerned. I don't care. But I'm retired. I don't have that many.
I'm
draws
open to that.
To bring the meeting forward, since the amount of information involved is not say again? One member's had a death in his family. So if there are no more deaths in the family, yeah, maybe we'll have 7 members. Thank you for the question.
I will just mention really quickly, I am out of town next Thursday. I only mentioned that in case we're
No,
thinking.
by
of
all means, if you
Thursday.
know, if we're
we're
talking next
limited.
week and you got a bad date, say it.
I'm just saying that because I know that I think Richard is on a cruise that goes through the end of the month, if I'm
Yeah,
remembering
I think you're
correctly.
right.
March.
It's Thursday night, so I don't know. I would be willing to do Tuesday.
I'm,
I'm open.
Let's say Tuesday. Tuesday would probably work good, right?
Yeah, and I think to be clear, ideally,
oh.
and the drawings,
The class thing next Tuesday.
Yeah, Tuesday,
It's our last class.
6 and 6.
Get our
You don't
caps
have
and
to meet
gowns. and-
At 7 either, if you don't want to. If we're doing a special meeting, it can be any time. We just need 18 hours notice.
on me Tuesday afternoon.
I have to
have
check
a-
my work schedule.
Are
Yeah, that
we
might
gonna
be
discuss
tricky.
Yeah.
additional
Like,
things
how
here,
about
or are we
Wednesday?
gonna
How
set
about-
that
Not
first?
tonight.
Okay, I was just wondering about this bit of information. It was,
Wednesday, I will be at a training.
How about Friday?
I'm out of town next Thursday to Sunday for a weekend trip.
Okay, so what was wrong with Monday? Or you won't be ready on Monday, probably.
We could do Monday if that works for the way.
Monday, I think.
Is Monday early evening?
this
work?
coming
Or-
Monday?
Monday, yeah, this coming Monday.
Then I can ask questions about this.
We're gonna have a
Just-
public hearing. That's
Yeah.
what that's about. I mean, that's the
Well,
next,
this particular document was just placed on our table tonight.
I know, that'll be, the information in that document will be part of whatever you submit on
Okay.
prior to,
Well, that's gonna need some explanation before I can do anything with any of
Well,
this.
yeah, I tried to talk about the design occupant load
Right, I understand.
and the comfortable occupant load in the,
Well, yeah, we actually did.
I think to just briefly explain that, just throw it out there, is that, Brandon works for me, from talking to the building inspector at MTS. He referred us, and we had a big discussion with the building code, which we have to follow, commercial building code. And what that is for, is just showing how, that tells you how Brad came up with the numbers that are on the list. There was more of an information form than anything to do directly with this. It's just
Okay.
how we came up, or Brad came up with those.
and I think it's helpful to have
Yeah,
a number to
that's all.
begin with.
Right, it is, and we just, after meeting with the fire department, we went through all that, and he recommended we should be talking to the building department.
So did the fire department see this?
Yes.
Thank you.
okay, did we decide on Monday
I,
can do
I-
Monday.
I could do
Monday
Monday.
evening,
Yeah.
yeah.
I could do Monday
Richard?
evening?
Oh,
Evening's
I
best.
guess.
Need to understand, unlike the city council, we don't get paid for this.
Question though, Cindy, the 18 hours, then we would know for certain, then I assume by like Thursday, if that was, if the timing was going to work.
Talking about next week, Monday, I will post it tomorrow.
Yeah.
That will be 18 hours before the meeting.
And then we'll get this, I mean, I just want to make sure we're not getting the site plan though. I don't know if that has an 18-hour requirement, but we get at least a little bit before.
I will
that
get
meeting.
it to you just as soon as
What do you
they
think?
get it to me.
We'll work on it tomorrow.
So do you think we'll have
I
it?
will try to get it to Cindy later.
Okay.
I was gonna say that there's no requirement that these be scaled architectural drawings. I mean, they can be you can draw them. They need dimensions that are accurate and
You mean on the height of the building and all that?
Exactly.
We give you all that. We have it all.
I figured.
Okay.
Okay, so we're good. We'll meet on Monday night at time.
I would prefer 6 o'clock because otherwise I have to sit here all by myself between 6 and 7, but
No, let's do 6
That's up to
o'clock.
I can make 6.
Trying to make it as
Mark,
easy as
Monday?
possible on everybody.
Is that okay with everybody?
That's cool. Can we leave
Well, there'll be a public hearing on Monday night.
Can you use it?
Can we leave these here?
Oh, sure.
Nobody will steal?
I didn't say that.
Okay.
May I ask?
Sure, go ahead. Bob.
Just while everyone is here, Cindy, do we have standards around things like intensity and density?
no.
Okay,
Those are
Just-
subjective.
Those are
It's just-
subjective
yeah.
things that you can condition upon. And it has to be reasonable, and related to mitigating the impact on the neighborhood.
okay. I just wanted to ask the question while everyone was here. Thank you.
And I think there's a question from the floor.
A question from the floor.
Jane or Catherine, I thought I heard.
I wondered when we would get. public hearing.
Yes, the purpose of the meeting will be to get to the public hearing and conduct the public hearing and ideally conclude the public hearing the same night. And it'll be the only thing on the agenda, hopefully.
Well, yeah, because at the last meeting, the only thing on this agenda was David, and then that got added to.
Hopefully,
Okay,
always hopeful.
good.
Okay. So that will conclude our discussion related to item 6A. We'll move on to item 7 on the agenda, which is
We need to have a motion, though,
motion to do what?
table or postpone to a special meeting on Monday at 6 PM.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Nay? None opposed? We will proceed as agreed. Item 7 is communications, of which there are none that are.
There are some that I put on your table.
Thank you, Mr. Murphy. Thank you.
Thanks.
There are some that I put on your table.
that we will defer to the Monday meeting, I think.
Yep.
Because they relate to this subject we just concluded.
Yeah, we had a number of emails as well with communications.
Reports of officers and committees. Bobby's just getting started, so she doesn't get to report. Public comments. We're open for public comments, limit of 3 minutes, say who you are, and we will deal with anything related to this project during the public hearing on Monday.
I'm not gonna take any more time. I'm ready to get to bed by now. And so
Me
I'll
too.
give you this.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here,
Not
Catherine.
asleep, but reading her.
Should go for the full Nordstrom. You don't need the rack. Come on. Go for the full margin.
Online, not at the store.
You're,
Grand Rapids is a
You're-
store.
you're spending the kid's inheritance. What difference does it make?
I'm just gonna say that, I'm Catherine Simon, Woodbury Poplar Street. What Cindy is trying to delineate relative to the purpose of this initiative, approved land use and the change, it's probably the most intense and important thing to the neighbors. I don't care if the windows are polyethylene or purple or wood or whatever. I don't care what color it is. What I do care about is the noise. What I do care about is the occupancy. And the definition of yes, it can hold 89, and I addressed it in there. I want to know the number that Christine spoke to, 25 to 30 outside, 25 to 30 inside. And that's the number I want held to this project. That is the utmost concern of me. And I spoke with Brady. He called me last night. He knows nothing about the use of the easement.
The owner of
In
the
other
other
words,
What
his sidewalk,
Oh,
which he said to me that he told her, Christine, that he doesn't care if she uses it for this or that, but if it's actually goes beyond a neighborly agreement, then they sell or he sells. He went, oh, I thought it would help the guy in the cottage to get the traffic.
You're talking about the space between
Yes.
the building and his, yeah.
When they corrected themselves and said, no, we're not coming through Catherine's parking lot and challenged me. Then they're over there and he doesn't want deliveries. He doesn't care if people walk there. But
You're talking about that small space between
Yes.
the
where
French
door
Market and
is, that's his property. Am I right?
that's,
Yeah, that's on the
Yeah.
survey,
I mean, that's literally what, 2 feet wide?
but that's
Right.
really not an easement. It's the space between two buildings on separate
Well,
parcels.
whatever it is, he knows nothing about it. I mentioned it and I opened up the paper.
So that's
So
the,
someone ought to be telling because Christine's.
As it relates to occupancy, personal, one-person view. That should be one number, not this many outside and this many inside. One number,
Right.
all
Right.
applying to the entire space that we're looking at here.
yeah,
So that you don't have, I mean, how can you have an enforcement thing where somebody goes outside and counts 16 heads there and 15 hit? Well,
I agree.
make it
I
easy.
agree.
yeah, I think we need to be a
But
little
then
careful
I-
talking about this level of.
I understand that,
Yes.
yeah.
And I also want something to be addressed about the drainage. If that pad is, my curb, her land is lower than my parking curb, so I should be okay. But that depends if she puts a 4-inch pad in there, then I'm not
But-
okay. Or
and-
a 3-inch pad. Where's
That
the
would be
slope?
done in consultation with our city engineer to make sure that.
Right,
that
yeah,
meets
and
the
that was
drainage.
mentioned in,
Condition,
Pardon?
we can condition approval.
Yes.
And I think isn't it also one of the requirements of the site plan?
yeah, I was just gonna mention that as part of the site plan requirements,
Well, there's,
unless it's waived, that we choose to add that as part of what we want to see.
well, you have two different the drawings here, I pointed that.
Yeah.
The original site plan shows, I don't know if that's land or boxes, but some sort of flower bed, because of historic, they talked about keeping the ivy, which indicated some flowerings or plantings. Am
I think
right, Cindy?
They would allow the ivy to grow on the fence, I think was the end,
Yeah, they
what I read.
encouraged it. But there, the path goes right to the buttress of the fence. Right? And then
As I said,
Brady doesn't want the music pointing, he wants it pointing north towards me.
I think that will
We're
be
not gonna
addressed in the
put the
condition.
music into the building.
sound will be a topic of discussion without question.
Well, I'm Jane Burbank, in Sagatuck. I'd like to talk about the transition. It's always been a perfect transition because people walk down the sidewalk, they see a seasonal rental house, they see the back of their restaurant. The party's not back here, the party's in front. It's always been kept on Water Street. Now it will wrap all the way around that restaurant. And people will be in Catherine's parking lot, they'll be in the post office parking lot, they'll be in front of my house, the noise will, Christine sells noise. And she can say it's gonna be a quiet little whatever, it's not, that's not what Christine does. And, you know, her word isn't real good, she doesn't have a track record with the city, I'll do this, I'll do that. She doesn't do anything. She forgets 5 times she's walked to the bottom of the steps. And I can say it right in front of her, she hadn't left. I've been on committees that she said, oh, I'll do that. And she does not do anything. And the big problem in this city is there is no enforcement. Never. Who's going to enforce down here? Who's going to walk into a wedding party of 120 people and say, you gotta go? Nobody's going to do that. But meanwhile, my guests are in bed, wide awake, and I lose money. You have to consider the rest of the neighborhood. We've been there for years and years. Catherine and I have an investment like you would not believe. That's our whole life. That's all our money. And to say it's okay is just wrong. The density's wrong, the intensity's wrong. There's no transition. That was a transitional neighborhood. And it's been that way until 2012, when she moved in and started, her words, a junkyard. And that's not fair to the rest of us. I know I have never called my property a junkyard, or one night in a council meeting, she called it a shit show. So if that's what she thinks of her establishment, how on earth can you let her make it bigger?
Thank you, Jane.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jane. Well, this is where we earn the money they don't pay us, so.
Yeah, that's right, sorry.
Okay, I'm going to close public comment, entertaining a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
Second.
Those in favor?
Aye.
I
Opposed? Not hearing any. We stand adjourned and look forward to seeing one another again here, same time,
Is it Monday now?
Yeah.
Monday at 6. Monday at
I
6.
know, when I was thinking 18 hours, I forgot.
I know.
Today is a kind of 18
Right.
hours. For this tomorrow morning.
I apologize, Dan, when you're sitting here literally staring at me at the beginning of the meeting. Come on, Russ, we just make a motion to approve the minutes. I'm like, I thought it'd already been done. So,
Can I keep that drawing of the
Thank you,
light
Catherine.
too? Thank you.
Oh, you want, yeah, sorry.
by the way, Bobby, your mic is off when that button's down. Now it's on.
Oh, I didn't know
Thank
that
you,
either.
thank you, Jane.
I was on the last track community master plan rewrite. It took 8 years.
Oh my
Not going to take Bobby 8
No,
years, I can
no,
promise you.
no.
Start to
Nah,
finish, 8
she's not
years.
using up a third of her 25 doing this.
Yeah.
I
So,
am
and
not.